The Supreme Court under attack again from the left, this time as a result of the immunity ruling for Donald Trump. And before I go on, let me be clear. I think this ruling is too broad. I think it goes too far. I think it gives a president too much room for mischief. But it's the sweeping denunciations of the Supreme Court that really bug me, not the specific critiques. Many on the left are piling on the institution and trying to undermine faith in it. With President Biden, by the way, leading the way last night, accusing the court of being purely partisan.
This decision today has continued the court's attack in recent years on a wide range of long-established legal principles in our nation, from gutting voting rights and civil rights, to taking away a woman's right to choose, to today's decision that undermines the rule of law of this nation.
But when a president makes comments like that, and Biden is not the first president to do it, I think it truly undermines the rule of law he's talking about. And the hysteria from the left just feeds into that.
Americans hate the Supreme Court. They think it's biased and corrupt. Why? Because it's biased and corrupt.
I mean, this court is so nakedly partisan. They've put their finger on the scale.
So nakedly, brazenly political in terms of how this came down. And even the way that the majority, Justice Roberts, tries to call out very rudely the dissent, saying that they're just hysterical women with their hair on fire about how this is going on.
Our tragic new reality today, our new normal, the Supreme Court targeting openly the rule of law in America.
And it's not just panic. Squad leader Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, promising to try to impeach all 6 Republican-appointed justices. No, obviously that's nonsense. But look, it's true. This is a sweeping opinion that will make any prosecution of Donald Trump or any president difficult. But when the left impugns the court more broadly and the Republican-appointed justices, they also ignore that for key parts of the decision, it was 5-4, with Justice Amy Coney Barrett showing independence here. Though she agreed with the standard set by the court, she also seemed ready to allow Donald Trump to be prosecuted now on certain charges. But more importantly, the left simply ignores the other rulings that run counter to the narrative that the court is just hopelessly politicized and even illegitimate. Just within the last week, the Supreme Court cleared the way for hospitals in Idaho to provide emergency abortions despite a state ban. Chief Justice John Roberts and Justices Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh joining with the liberal justices in a 6-3 vote. The same justices joining together to throw out a lawsuit by Republican-led states that claimed Biden officials unconstitutionally coerced social media platforms to take down controversial social media posts. Also last week, by an 8-1 vote, the justices voted to uphold a federal law barring people who are the subject of domestic violence restraining orders from owning weapons. The ruling, which was celebrated by gun control advocates, amounts to one of the court's biggest checks on the scope of the Second Amendment in nearly 2 decades. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts said, quote, "Together, the surety and going armed laws confirm what common sense suggests. When an individual poses a clear threat of physical violence to another, the threatening individual may be disarmed." It's just more evidence that the Supreme Court is not simply making decisions based on party lines. Again, there is no question this is a very, very conservative court. Any judge who tells you, we just decide things on the law, ignores the reality of human nature. There's no such thing. Everything involves some intersection of law and other principles. But so many on the left continue to call this court hopelessly politicized, even calling into question its legitimacy as an institution. And that flies in the face of significant evidence to the contrary. And yet, you have people like Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin at a discussion of House Democrats insisting the court is just acting in the interests of the GOP.
The court has been behaving like a rabid partisan actor. The right-wing justices, 5 of them named to the court by Bush and Trump, the 2 presidents elected in this century to the presidency after losing the popular vote, now act entirely like the judicial arm of the Republican Party.
And Congressman Raskin is just one of many high-profile Democratic lawmakers who seem to be questioning the very legitimacy of the High Court.
I feel very, very strongly that the credibility and stature of the Supreme Court has crumbled.
The Supreme Court is illegitimate. It is corrupt.
They themselves have been destroying the legitimacy of the court, which is profoundly dangerous for our entire democracy.
I've said this before. What's profoundly dangerous are sustained attacks on the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. And those attacks aren't only dangerous, they're off base. They discount rulings that don't fit that narrative. The court sided 9-0 with the Biden administration's FDA rejecting a challenge from a group of conservative doctors and other medical professionals trying to stop the FDA approval of the abortion drug mifepristone. The Biden administration successfully challenged a lower court ruling which would have restricted access to the drug. And last year, big ruling. The court found that Alabama's Republican-drawn congressional map violated the Voting Rights Act. Alabama legislators were deemed to have unconstitutionally marginalized black voters by drawing the map to have a majority of white voters in 6 of the state's 7 congressional districts, despite nearly a third of the state's population being black. The court then upheld their decision in a second challenge to the ruling several months later, finding that the state's redrawn map just didn't do enough to restore the rights of black voters. And also this term, the court ruled against several Trump-aligned lawyers who were sanctioned for making baseless claims in a 2020 election lawsuit. Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, and other attorneys hit with more than $175,000 in sanctions for making claims about the 2020 election that a Michigan court deemed to be frivolous. Powell and the others argued the penalties were improper, but a U.S. Court of Appeals upheld them against Powell and Wood, and the Supreme Court declined to intervene. And there are many other decisions that refute the idea that the Supreme Court is just political. All the evidence, though, doesn't really seem to matter to many on the left. And I am telling you something, they're going to need the Supreme Court at some point. And I think they're going to regret it. By the way, the evidence doesn't seem to matter to many on the right either, who continue to insist that the Department of Justice has been weaponized against conservatives. Remember, I mean, even late last month, the FBI raids the home of Democratic Oakland Mayor Sheng Tao. Dozen agents spent several hours combing through the mayor's home. They removed boxes. And by the way, she says it's all political against her. And she's just the latest notable Democrat to be targeted by this DOJ. Congressman Henry Cuellar, sitting congressman, Senator Bob Menendez, both under indictment. Menendez on trial on various counts of bribery-related charges. Congressman Cori Bush, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, both under investigation by the FBI. Hunter Biden, recently convicted, set to stand trial again on felony tax charges this fall. Former Baltimore City State Attorney Marilyn Mosby, former California Congressman T.J. Cox, former Louisiana Democratic Party Chair Karen Carter Peterson, former Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum. The list goes on and on. And none of that seems to change any minds on the right. There's so many on the right who still insist that DOJ is out to get them, just as there are so many liberals convinced that the Supreme Court is only going to rule for conservatives. During his remarks at that roundtable, Congressman Raskin not only ignored the many high court decisions that go against conservatives, he also rejected the premise that the justices might be putting their view of the law before politics.
Constitutional doctrine has been reduced in this court to a series of blatantly unjust and thoroughly ideological decisions like these: upholding white political supremacy, racial inequality, corporate power, and right-wing control over our democratic institutions. All of the preening lectures about textualism and originalism today are nothing but a fraud on the public.
But it's not just the conservative justices who lecture that the court has not become hopelessly politicized. At a recent forum in Washington, liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor appeared with conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett. If there's anyone you're going to say it's hopelessly partisan, and she was very outspoken in the dissent in this immunity ruling, and yet she pretty much rejected the idea.
We don't come into this work as a Republican or a Democrat. you come into it as and I do as well, as a judge who believes that our job is to find the best answer to the legal questions that the court is presented with. And so I think that's sacred to almost all of us.
Almost all of us. But I also brought up this topic to recently retired liberal Justice Stephen Breyer during an event here in New York, and he had a similar response.
And there are a lot of people who are now convinced that the court is political. What do you think?
I think political is a tough word and not the right word. Are you popular or not popular? That's political. No. In that sense of political, no. It's not there. I haven't seen it in 28 years. You're there to decide the cases under law.
And yet, comments like those from steadfastly liberal justices have done little to silence critics on the left. Look, there is an enormous difference between disagreeing with a ruling or with rulings and going after the entire institution. Criticize individual decisions all you want. I have disagreed with this court plenty. I will continue to do so. As I said, I think this immunity decision is way too broad. But that is very different from attacking its very foundation. And what I find particularly rich about these attacks on the Supreme Court from so many on the left is that they so often denounce Donald Trump and others on the right for going after important government institutions. Not just the DOJ, but state election systems, the CDC, so many other government institutions that they've denounced as rigged instruments corrupted by some deep state. When Trump and his allies talk about rigged and corrupt systems, you see all this anger from the left about how important it is to uphold and respect these institutions. But all that seems to go out the window when it comes to an institution that they don't like right now. Here we call both sides out when they don't have the evidence to back up sweeping and, in my view, dangerous claims. And we're doing it for what we call the marginalized moderate majority, and we're going to keep doing it. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.